Every community has someone you rely on, without doubt a figure of authority, someone you know will always act morally. But when that confidence is betrayed, what results? Crossing the boundary, separating protector from predator results in what? Nothing looked unusual in this tranquil, comfortable village. Children ran about the streets, neighbors said hello, and life went as usual. But behind the surface of daily life, something was developing that would leave the community reeling. When the person everyone looks up to, the one pledged to serve and defend, has anything to hide, what do? At first, nothing looked out of place. He was a parent, a sheriff, a spouse. She was a bright young girl with her whole life ahead of her. Their paths met like so many others in this little town. But somewhere along the road, something changed. Conversations that started casually got longer. Intimate times, once benign, morphed into something far more difficult. And before anyone realized it, the line had been crossed, a line that could never be uncrossed. How can a community come to grips with the knowledge that the person they trusted the most is capable of the unimaginable? Some think every crime leaves a trace, no matter how neatly it's concealed. But what happens when the one leading the hunt is the one person who knows precisely where that trail ends? Sheriff Graham Walker was more than simply a man in uniform. He was the cornerstone of our community, trusted by neighbors, revered by co-workers, and beloved by his family. To most, Graham was a guy who combined the obligations of law enforcement with the responsibilities of being a husband and parent. Married to Brenda with 2 kids, he had the life others aspired to, flawlessly blending career and family. His younger daughter, Nina, adored him. To Nina, her father wasn't simply the sheriff. He was her hero, the pillar of their family. Graham's second daughter has a best friend, Lorraine Carter. Lorraine had spent much of her youth in the Walker family. She and Nina were inseparable, the type of friends that didn't knock before entering each other's homes. Lorraine was virtually family. Their bond extended back as far as anybody could remember, from playing in the garden as babies to late-night study sessions in high school. Wherever Nina was, Lorraine wasn't far behind. But Lorraine wasn't simply Nina's best friend. She was the daughter of Officer Malcolm Carter, a deputy who had served under Graham for years. Malcolm and Graham enjoyed more than a business connection. They were personal friends. They had enjoyed holidays together, attended family reunions, and stood by one another through life's ups and downs. Lorraine's presence in Graham's life was as steady as the ticking of a clock, something that never required a second thought. She was just always there. The link between these families was developed over years, bolstered by trust and shared experiences. Graham recalls the day Lorraine was born as if it were yesterday. He had been in the hospital, holding her small body in his arms, promising Malcolm that he would always be there for her. Over the years, their lives intermingled naturally. There were neighborhood picnics where Lorraine perched on Graham's shoulders, summer vacations when the Carter and Walker families laughed together, and Christmas mornings spent exchanging gifts. Lorraine was there for everything: birthdays, performances, and peaceful Sunday afternoons in the Walker living room. Her bond to Graham was strong and unquestionable. To Lorraine, Graham was Nina's father, a second father figure in her life, someone she could trust totally. She never thought twice about being in his presence, whether it was at his house, at family occasions, or walking by his office after school. But now, Lorraine was 17, no longer the tiny child Graham had once carried on his shoulders. She was entering into adulthood with thoughts of becoming someone significant, someone who would one day wear a badge of her own. Lorraine had ambition, the type that could fill a room with electricity. She aspired to join one of the top security services in the country, maybe the FBI, maybe the Secret Service. She had objectives, and she knew what she wanted. Their lives, previously tied via friendship and family, now poised on the verge of a transition neither of them could see coming. Graham saw her more frequently, now not only as Nina's best friend, but as someone with whom he crossed paths regularly. She was in his house virtually every weekend. They saw each other at family gatherings and school functions, and occasionally, Lorraine came by the sheriff's office to visit her father, waiting in the lobby or wandering the corridors. She was constantly there, always present in the background of Graham's existence. And with each new day, their paths grew just a bit more entwined. It started like any other day, one that should have slid into the usual rhythm of existence. But certain moments have a way of rearranging everything, and this one would be no different. Lorraine Carter hadn't intended on spending long at the sheriff's station. She had merely gone over to meet her father, Officer Malcolm Carter, expecting for a brief hello and a ride home. It was something she had done numerous times before, sitting in the familiar corridors, surrounded by the murmur of conversations and the odd ring of phones. It was average, unremarkable, but on this particular occasion, the air felt different. Graham Walker observed her from his office window as she entered the station, her presence capturing his eye in a manner it never had before. She wasn't the same girl he recalled. A ghost of youth had given way to the obvious figure of a young lady. There was an elegance in the way she walked now, a calm assurance that hadn't been there before. Graham assured himself it was nothing, simply an observation. But the notion remained longer than it should have. He knew Lorraine well, too well, in fact. He had seen her grow up, laughed at her youthful pranks, and celebrated her triumphs with his daughter Nina. But now, for reasons he couldn't entirely describe, something stirred inside him, a shift he didn't want to admit. He tried to brush it off, tried to remind himself of who she was, who he was. But the longer he observed her, the more impossible it got to look away. She wasn't simply Lorraine, the young kid from the backyard birthday celebrations. She was someone else now, someone he found himself noticing in ways he shouldn't. The instant of realization shook him, like an unexpected slip on familiar terrain. Guilt gnawed at the corners of his thinking, whispering that this was wrong, that he ought to stop. But temptation has a way of seeping in, weaving its way through holes in even the most disciplined intellect. And as much as he attempted to push it away, it clung to him, insistent and unpleasant. When Lorraine made her way down the corridor toward her father's desk, Graham stepped out of his office almost instinctively. Because knew Malcolm was out on assignment, because having sent him out earlier himself, there was no one else for Lorraine to meet, no one else for her to sit with. And in that instant, Graham saw an opening, a means to prolong this contact, to pursue a curiosity he didn't want to acknowledge he felt. "Lorraine," he called out, his voice easygoing, even fatherly. "Your dad's not back yet. Why don't you come wait in my office?" There was nothing in his tone to imply anything strange, no cause for Lorraine to be apprehensive. She grinned readily, trusting him totally. He was, after all, her father's best friend, someone she had known her whole life. She followed him without hesitation, stepping inside the office that she had seen so many times before. Graham offered her a seat near the window, observing as she settled in. She gazed about the room, her eyes catching on the antiques and pictures scattered on the shelves, souvenirs from years in law enforcement, framed commendations, and keepsakes from past cases. The chamber, much like the guy himself, looked steeped in experience and power. Lorraine viewed it all with a kind of amazement, unconscious of the ideas unfolding in Graham's head. He tried to seem normal, tried to persuade himself that this was just another chat, just another day. But when he sat down across from her, something inside him refused to settle down. She wasn't simply a guest in his office. She was a young lady sitting within arm's reach, someone who, for the first time in years, made him feel something unexpected. He questioned her about school, an easy topic, familiar turf, and Lorraine, secure in his presence, spoke gladly. She chatted about her academics, her friends, and the future she envisioned for herself. "I've been thinking about going into law enforcement," she added, her voice shining with excitement. "Maybe the detectives, or even the Secret Service, something that matters." Graham listened, his concentration completely on her now. There was a seriousness in her comments, a spark of ambition that recalled him of his own younger days. And at that moment, he saw an opportunity, a chance to provide direction, to position himself as someone who might help mold her destiny. The thought occurred to him, unbidden, a method to continue their chats beyond this office, to make sure these moments between them didn't finish here. "You know," Graham continued slowly, "I have some acquaintances in those agencies. I could put in a good word for you, maybe even assist you obtain some hands-on experience." Lorraine's face brightened up at the offer. "Really? You'd do it for me?" He grinned, playing the part of the mentor she imagined him to be. "Of course, but there's a lot to learn before you get there. It's not an easy road, and you'll need to work hard if you want. I might assist you prepare." There was nothing in his speech that suggested anything other than genuine friendliness, and Lorraine, anxious to succeed, accepted the offer without hesitation. She didn't doubt his motivations. Why would she? To her, he was just an older, experienced man providing her counsel, someone she trusted entirely. Graham reclined back in his chair, happy with how smoothly the discussion had flowed, how readily he had set the seeds for future encounters. He convinced himself this was harmless, that he was merely helping a young woman attain her aspirations. But deep inside, he knew better. He realized that every word he had uttered, every commitment he had made, was part of something far more convoluted. As Lorraine sat across from him, enthusiastic about the chances ahead, Graham gave himself a minute to luxuriate in the power he had, the ability to mold her aspirations, to steer her path, and if he chose, to take these meetings farther than she could ever imagine. And in that instant, a road of no return had been crossed, one that could never be undone. Opportunities might feel like lifelines, especially when they come from someone you trust. For Lorraine, Graham's offer of mentoring seemed like a step toward everything she had dreamt of, a rare chance to achieve forward in a competitive industry, mentored by someone with experience, influence, and connections. But what she couldn't see, what no one saw, was how quickly a dream can become a trap in the hands of the wrong person. Graham's idea was simple: a few private sessions, just the two of them, focused on preparing Lorraine for the world of national security. He presented it as career advisor method to give her the edge she needed to thrive. At first, Lorraine felt nothing but thankfulness. After all, how many young ladies her age got this type of attention from someone in a position of power? He promised her that his advice would set her apart from the throng, unlocking avenues she hadn't even thought yet. But Graham was meticulous, too careful with every word, every suggestion. He placed minor doubts in Lorraine's mind. He urged her not to tell too many others about their meetings, arguing they wouldn't comprehend her ambition. People might try to hold you back, he warned. They might tell you it's impossible, that you're aiming too high. The fewer people know, the better. It's safer that way. At first, it made logical to Lorraine. She'd heard the worries from others before, how young ladies, especially women like her, shouldn't strive too high. Graham's admonition seemed safe, even sensible. She didn't question it. Why would she? He was merely looking out for her. Or so she thought. The sessions began innocently enough: talks about the challenges of law enforcement, the need of resilience, and the skills she'd need to flourish in high-pressure circumstances. They gathered after school hours, at first in Graham's office, then eventually at more secluded locales under the premise of concentrated training. He always made her feel unique, like she was receiving something no one else could provide her. And Lorraine, eager to please, gave the sessions her all, feeling they were sculpting her future. But eventually, the character of these encounters began to shift. What started as professional assistance became something more personal, more intimate. Graham started questioning her about her life outside of school, her concerns, her hopes, her relationships. He blurred the boundary between mentor and confidant, weaving himself deeper into her life without her recognizing it. He was patient, calculated. He didn't push things. He let Lorraine come to him, enabled her to trust him entirely. Every time she opened up, every time she depended on him for counsel, the hold he held on her life tightened. And Lorraine, absorbed in the warmth of his attention, never saw it for what it was. She thought she was being directed, not manipulated. She assumed Graham was helping her, not grooming her. The meetings began to stretch further into the evenings. Graham always had a cause to extend them, a vital issue they hadn't addressed yet, a critical piece of advice that couldn't wait. Soon, they were meeting late into the night. The talks were positioned as vital, essential stages on her route toward achievement. If you want to make it, he urged her, you have to be willing to put in the extra effort. And Lorraine, motivated by ambition and the need to please him, agreed without hesitation. She told herself these sessions were part of her progress, that the late hours were a tiny price to pay for everything Graham was providing her. But with each session, she found herself more linked to him, not only as a mentor, but as someone she trusted deeply, someone she depended on in ways she couldn't articulate. Graham understood precisely what he was doing. He framed his comments carefully, making her think that their time together was both a luxury and a secret, something they had to safeguard from anyone who may misunderstand. Some people won't see this for what it really is, he warned her. They'll think it's inappropriate. They'll try to come between us, tell you to quit, make you give up on your dream. But I know how far you can go, Lorraine. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Lorraine believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was the sheriff, her father's close friend, the guy who had known her all her life. If he said their meetings were required, they were. If he stated the secrecy was for her advantage, she trusted him. And so, she stayed silent, telling no one, not her father, not Nina, not her closest friends, about the time she spent with Graham. The late-night discussions gradually established their own little realm, a place where Lorraine felt both vulnerable and strong. Graham made her feel like she was becoming someone significant, someone capable of big things. And the more time they spent together, the more she leaned on him, not only for counsel, but for emotional support. She regarded him as a guardian, someone who knew her in ways no one else did. But Graham's mentorship wasn't simply about her future, it was about something selfish. He made sure she needed him not just for her work, but for her feeling of self-worth. With every passing week, Lorraine felt herself more connected to him, more dependent on his praise. She wasn't only learning from him, she was falling under his spell. Then, one evening, the dynamic altered totally. They were studying case files, discussing real-world examples of high-pressure decision-making, when Graham's touch lingered for a bit too long on her shoulder. Lorraine didn't draw away. She didn't know she should. It seemed like part of the intimacy they had developed, a natural extension of the tie they shared. And Graham, sensing her acquiescence, interpreted it as license to go farther. The first kiss happened without notice, yet it didn't seem forced. It felt natural, like a step they had been heading toward all along. Lorraine, absorbed in the moment, didn't question it. She had gotten used to following Graham's lead, trusting his counsel. If this was part of their relationship, then she embraced it. That night, the connection between mentor and lover dissolved totally. What followed was no longer merely mentorship. It was a full-fledged affair, cloaked beneath the same shroud of secrecy Graham had so carefully built. Their encounters continued, now imbued with a new intensity, a combination of passion and control that left Lorraine feeling both thrilled and vulnerable. She was slipping deeper, believing that what they exchanged was genuine. To Lorraine, Graham wasn't just a mentor anymore. He was her leader, her guardian, her everything. But Graham's hold over Lorraine wasn't simply emotional, it was total. He had weaved himself into every facet of her life, and with every passing day, she depended more on him, trusted him more, and thought that what they had was something worth maintaining. And as their affair developed, the walls surrounding them closed closer, trapping Lorraine into a world she didn't understand, was founded on deception and lies. There was no going back now. Graham had her precisely where he wanted, utterly under his control and passionately in love. Secrets have a way of altering people, of slipping into the little spaces of existence and pushing things just slightly out of place. At first, the changes are slight, scarcely perceptible. But as time goes on, the weight of those buried realities begins to appear. For Lorraine, the romance with Graham had become the focus of her universe. Where formerly she had been open, cheerful, and connected to those closest to her, she now began to drift apart gently but steadily. The Lorraine everyone knew was fading into the shadows. Calls from pals went unanswered. Hangouts with Nina got fewer and further between. And discussions with her father, Malcolm, were fewer by the day. Where formerly she had shared everything with him, the minor successes, the everyday disappointments, now she gave him little more than one-word responses and excuses. Malcolm could feel the gap expanding, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly why. He had always been close to Lorraine. They had enjoyed a closeness that most dads would envy. But suddenly, every attempt to connect appeared to be greeted with a wall. She was always busy, always exhausted, always preoccupied. He attempted to shrug it off at first. Teenagers go through phases, he told himself. Maybe it's the stress of school, the pressure of thinking about her future. But the longer it went on, the harder it grew to ignore. There was a shift in her manner, something that felt out of character. The Lorraine he knew didn't hold secrets from him. But suddenly, it seemed as if she were carrying something weighty, something she wasn't willing to reveal. Malcolm wasn't the sort to let things slip for long. One evening, he got his chance to confront her. She had returned home late, her countenance remote, as if her mind were someplace else completely. He waited until she was in the kitchen, putting her stuff down, before going in. "Lorraine," he replied, keeping his tone level, "we need to talk." Lorraine looked up, a flash of remorse crossing her face before she hid it with a grin. "What's up, Dad?" she inquired, her voice easygoing, but Malcolm could sense the anxiety behind it. "I've noticed you've been distant lately," Malcolm replied gently. "You're not around as much. You're not talking to me like you used to." What's going on? For a minute, Lorraine appeared caught off guard, as if she hadn't expected him to notice. But then she smiled again, this time more forced. It's nothing, Dad. Just school, you know. A lot on my plate. Malcolm wasn't convinced. Something was different, and no matter how hard she tried to seem normal, he could feel the distance between them expanding. He touched her softly, asking if there was anything she needed to talk about, anything that could be upsetting her. But Lorraine was ready for the questions. She had learned from Graham how to duck, how to divert, how to direct talks away from risky area without raising too much suspicion. I'm fine, she said, her voice just a touch too bright. Really, Dad? You don't have to worry about me. Malcolm wanted to believe her, wanted to take her statements at their value. But a knot of uneasiness developed in his belly, one that he couldn't quite escape. Meanwhile, Graham was carefully handling the changes in his own life. Brenda, his wife, had began to sense that something was odd. After years of marriage, she knew Graham better than anybody, and recently, there were minor things that didn't match together. He has always been a guy of routine, steady, predictable, trustworthy. But lately, there were instances when he appeared distant, preoccupied, as if his mind was someplace else completely. He came home later than normal, delivering vague justifications about long shifts or unexpected appointments. And when he was home, there was a restlessness about him, a discomfort that Brenda hadn't noticed before. She asked him about it, of course mild, discreet inquiries, not wanting to look accusing. Everything okay at work? She would inquire as they sat down for supper. Or, you seem a little off lately. Is something bothering you? Graham was ready for the questions. He knew how to deceive without making it obvious, how to deliver just enough truth to satisfy her without giving anything away. It's just work, he would add, his tone light, but not too light. You know how things get this time of year. And Brenda, though still uncomfortable, would let it go for a while, at least. But the nagging sense didn't go away. She noticed the subtle things, how he checked his phone more often, how he appeared abnormally cautious about where he was going or what he was doing. There were times when he came to bed long after she had fallen asleep, and mornings when he left the home earlier than normal, usually with an explanation at the ready. Brenda told herself she was probably overthinking things. Graham was the sheriff, after all. His employment came with its fair share of stress and responsibility. But deep inside, she realized this wasn't just about job. Something had changed. She just couldn't figure out what. The stress in the Walker home was minor at first, scarcely visible. But it increased with each passing day, like a splinter buried beneath the skin, tiny enough to ignore, but difficult to forget. Graham was careful, albeit careful to never let the cracks show too much. Careful to keep the walls of his secret existence intact. He understood how to say the proper things, how to show just enough affection to keep skepticism at bay. To Brenda, he was still the man she had married, but a little more weary, a little more busy. To his girls, he was still their father, only a touch more aloof than normal. But Graham knew the truth. He understood that the walls were creeping in slowly but certainly. And no matter how carefully he controlled things, the weight of his secret was beginning to take its toll. Lorraine, too, was feeling the pressure. She mourned the simplicity of her former existence, missed the comfort with which she could talk to her father, and the carefree fun she used to have with Nina. But every time she thought about stepping back, about drawing away from Graham, she felt the invisible cords tighten around her. He had become more than just a tutor, more than just a lover. He had become the focus of her existence. And even as she felt the gap developing between herself and the people she loved, she persuaded herself it was worth it. Graham had promised her a future, had made her think that what they had was precious. She couldn't walk away now, not when she had already gone so far. And thus, the distance built between Lorraine and her father, between Graham and his wife, between who they were and who they had become. The gaps were microscopic, but they were there, waiting, expanding, threatening to smash everything the minute the truth came to light. Secrets have a tendency of unraveling at the worst conceivable moment. What begins softly, buried in the corners of stolen time, may blossom into something that begs to be seen no matter how neatly it's concealed. And for Graham and Lorraine, the moment they feared, the moment they never believed would happen, was now here. Lorraine has suspected something was wrong for a few weeks. At first, she disregarded it, believing herself that stress or tiredness was to blame. But as the days went, the symptoms grew difficult to disregard. The sickness in the mornings, the abrupt tiredness, the gnawing awareness that something had altered within her. Eventually, she bought a pregnancy test, hoping, praying, that it was only her imagination. But as the 2 lines showed, confirming her biggest dread, the ground underneath her seemed to move. She glanced at the test in bewilderment, her pulse beating as 1,000 things rushed her head. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't planned for this. And yet, there it was, the unmistakable confirmation that life, in all its chaotic unpredictability, had taken a turn she never saw coming. She sat in quiet for what felt like hours, the weight of the revelation sitting hard on her chest. And in that quiet, only one idea stuck out clearly. She had to tell Graham. He had vowed to be there for her, to help her construct a future. If anybody could assist her negotiate this, it would be him, wouldn't it? When Lorraine eventually collected the nerve to tell him, it was during one of their late-night sessions. They were seated together, the air between them dense with the typical combination of tension and closeness. She knew that once she spoke the words, everything would change. There would be no going back. "Graham," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "I need to tell you something." He gazed at her, recognizing the gravity in her tone. "What is it?" he questioned, leaning in slightly, as if bracing himself for what was coming. Lorraine paused for a time, her hands quivering slightly, and then she said it, the words flowing out before she could second-guess herself. "I'm pregnant." For a minute, the world appeared to stop still. Graham glanced at her, his expression frozen in bewilderment. The words hung in the air like a ticking bomb, each second stretching into an eternity. Panic hit him like a tidal wave. His thoughts raced through the possibilities, what this meant for his profession, his family, his reputation. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was now hanging by a thread. If anybody found out, if his wife, his girls, the community, or the department uncovered the truth, his life would be finished. Graham felt the walls closing up on him, the weight of his double existence crushing him from all sides. He needed a solution, something quick, something definite. This couldn't get out. It wouldn't get out. "We can't do this," he replied, his voice harsh, almost terrified. "This can't happen. No one can." "No." Lorraine glanced at him, perplexity and hurt flitting over her features. "What do you mean? We can figure this out. You said you'd always be there for me." Graham ran a hand through his hair, his head reeling. He couldn't afford this embarrassment. He couldn't afford the repercussions. In his fear, a solitary idea emerged. There was yet time to repair this. There was yet time to make it go away. He leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get rid of it, Lorraine. We have to end this before it's too late." Lorraine's heart plummeted at his words, incredulity flooding over her. She had come to him for comfort, for reassurance. But instead, she was met with dread and rejection. "You're asking me to have an abortion?" she said, her voice shaking. Graham nodded, despair etched on his features. "It's the only way," he insisted. "If anyone finds out, my wife, your father, everything will be ruined. We can't let that happen. Please, Lorraine, you have to do this." But Lorraine shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No," she answered firmly. "I won't do that. This is our child, Graham. You told me we were in this together. You promised." For the first time, Graham knew that Lorraine believed in the dream he had spun around her, that their love was real, that they had a future together. And in that instant, he realized the full weight of his manipulation. She wasn't just carrying his kid. She was carrying all the promises he had made to her, all the falsehoods he had given her to keep her near. Graham's terror intensified. He attempted to reason with her, to make her comprehend the danger they were in. "You don't understand," he implored. "If this gets out, my career is over. My family, my life, everything will be destroyed. We can't let that happen, Lorraine. You have to do this." But Lorraine was resolute. She shook her head again, her voice calm despite the tears flowing down her face. "I won't do it," she stated softly but firmly. "I won't get rid of it. This is my child, and I won't let you make me feel ashamed for wanting to keep it." Graham felt the earth falling from beneath him, his grip over the situation disintegrating with every word she uttered. He had based his whole existence on retaining control over his profession, his family, his relationships. And now, in the face of Lorraine's silent refusal, that power was slipping through his fingers like sand. For the first time in his life, Graham Walker, the guy everyone perceived as stable, collected, and in charge felt powerless. And it frightened him. He tried one final time, his voice cracking beneath the weight of his desperation. "Please, Lorraine," he murmured. "If you care about me, if you care about what we have, you'll do this. You'll end it before it's too late." But Lorraine's resolve didn't waver. She stared him in the eye, her voice steady. "No," she responded simply. "I'm keeping it." And in that moment, Graham realized that the life he had so carefully crafted, the one he had battled so hard to protect, was on the edge of shattering around him. There was no going back now. The truth was out, and no matter how hard Graham attempted to control the story, the repercussions of his actions were closing in. The question wasn't whether the truth would come to light. It was how much harm it would leave in its wake. There comes a moment where terror dominates everything. Logic vanishes, morality breaks, and all that left is the drive to survive no matter the cost. For Graham, that time had arrived. With every passing day, the walls of his carefully crafted existence were closing in, and the truth loomed like a shadow, waiting to swallow him whole. The pregnancy was a menace Graham couldn't escape. No amount of lies or coaxing had succeeded. Lorraine had made it plain she wasn't going to terminate the pregnancy, and with that choice, Graham's world spun on its axis. His job, his marriage, his reputation, everything was now on the edge of ruin. If the truth got out, there would be no forgiveness, no way to heal the destruction it would leave behind. He spent sleepless nights looking at the ceiling, considering every conceivable consequence. Each scenario ended the same way: scandal, dishonor, ruin. His name would be dragged through the mud. The sheriff's office would disintegrate under the weight of public fury. His wife, Brenda, would leave him. His daughters would disown him. And the town that once admired him will turn against him with anger. He saw no way out, no way to control the damage. But suddenly, a thought crept in, a notion that should have appalled him, but instead provided a warped feeling of clarity. There was one way, one final option to make sure the truth never saw the light of day. He convinced himself that was the only answer, the only way to defend all he had worked for. He knew it was bad, realized that crossing this boundary would be a point of no return. But in his opinion, the option wasn't between right and bad anymore. It was between survival and annihilation. The plan evolved slowly, taking shape in the dark recesses of his mind. If Lorraine was gone, if she simply went, no one would ever know. There would be questions, of course, but questions could be controlled. He was the sheriff, after all. He had expertise in directing inquiries, in guiding them away from difficult realities. He could make it appear like she had vanished on her own. He could make sure that no one ever linked the dots. Graham waited till the timing was right. He stretched out to Lorraine, his voice soothing and encouraging, as he asked her to dinner at a discreet spot, just the two of them. He presented it as an opportunity to talk about the future, to make plans for the kid, to find out how they might manage the situation together. And Lorraine, despite everything, still believed in him. She wanted to believe that they could make things work, that Graham would stand by her as he had promised. She arrived to the spot, a modest hut on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. Graham welcomed her with the same familiar grin, the same soothing presence that had pulled her in from the beginning. He had arranged everything for a quiet meal, just the two of them, with wine poured into dainty cups and a nice fire blazing in the hearth. They spoke throughout supper, their discussion laden with promises and reassurances. Graham assured her everything she wanted to hear, that they would figure things out, that they could still create a future together, that everything would be good. And for a small while, Lorraine allowed herself to believe him. She let her defenses down, feeling the familiar pull of the guy she thought she knew. But Graham's thoughts was elsewhere, fixated on the little bottle secreted in his pocket, a vial holding the medicine that would ensure Lorraine never informed a soul. He waited until the proper moment. Lorraine was concentrated on the topic, ignorant of Graham's mounting stress. As she picked at her food, Graham leaned in casually, grabbing for her glass. "Let me top that off for you," he said with an easy smile, holding the wine bottle. Before she could react, she was in her brain, having nice ideas of having a kid with the sheriff. With practiced ease, he poured the wine, keeping his other hand steady while he palmed the vial. As the liquid trickled into the glass, he tilted the bottle just slightly, allowing the vial's contents to fall into the wine unnoticed. No stirring, no swirling, it melted effortlessly with the pour, hiding beneath the deep crimson. He gave the glass back without breaking a beat, his speech pleasant and chatty. "This should help us relax a little," he added with a grin, watching as Lorraine, trusting and unaware, took a drink then another. The wine flowed effortlessly as the talk proceeded. It didn't take long for the medicine to take action. Lorraine's eyes got heavy, her words slurring as she fought to keep up with the talk. A flood of perplexity rushed over her, and she stared at Graham with a scowl, as if trying to make sense of the sudden fatigue that had overcome her. "I don't feel so good," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Graham stretched out, his palm resting on hers in a show of fake consolation. "It's okay," he murmured quietly. "You just need to rest. Everything's going to be fine." Lorraine's body went slack, her head lolling to the side as the medication drew her into oblivion. Graham studied her for a while, confirming that the medicine had done its work, and then, without a hint of hesitancy, he went to the next step of his plan. He carried her to his truck, her unconscious body cradled in his arms like a gloomy echo of the day he had held her as a newborn. But this time, there was no delight, no pride, simply icy resolve. Graham drove in solitude. The road stretched out before him like a route toward liberation. He had picked the spot deliberately, an isolated region deep in the woods, far from any route or road. It was a spot no one would stumble into by mistake, a place where secrets could stay buried. The trip was lengthy, the weight of what he was about to do crushing down on him with every mile. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The instant he had crossed the line, there was no turning back. There was only one route forward now, and he was dedicated to seeing it through. When he reached the clearing, he climbed out of the truck and peered about, confirming that they were alone. The woodland was still, the trees standing like silent spectators to what was about to unfold. Graham unlocked the door and removed Lorraine from the passenger seat, her body still lifeless and unresponsive. He took her deep into the woods, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. And then, in that isolated, forgotten area, he did what he had convinced himself he had to do. He knelt beside her, his hands quivering only slightly as he put them over her mouth and nose. Lorraine awoke briefly, her body responding instinctively, but the medication had taken too strong a hold. Within seconds, the battle ceased, and the jungle was silent once again. Graham remained there for a minute, his palms still pressed over her lifeless face, his breath coming in harsh rushes. And then, as if on autopilot, he began to dig. He worked swiftly, the earth flying beneath his hands as he made a small hole. Time blurred, the weight of his deeds settling like a stone in his chest. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to quit, not now. When the burial was done, he lay Lorraine's body inside, covering her with the cold, damp soil. And just like that, she was gone, crushed beneath the weight of lies and treachery. Graham stood over the grave, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The night was calm, the woodland holding its breath, as if waiting to see what he would do next. But there was nothing left to do. He had made his choice, and now there was just stillness. Without a word, Graham turned and made his way back to the vehicle, leaving no indication of what had occurred. The forest would preserve his secret, and with it, the life he had been so determined to protect. But some secrets refuse to stay hidden. When someone goes missing in a close-knit village, it sends shockwaves through every area of the community. People rally together, neighbors exchange frightened glances, and families clutch tighter to one another, praying it never happens to them. But this time, the missing individual wasn't just anyone. This was Lorraine Carter, the daughter of a beloved cop, a girl everyone knew and adored. The day Lorraine didn't come home, worry began to grow. Her parents, Malcolm and Vivian Carter, moved from believing she was running late to understanding something was very, very wrong. They tried her phone, no response. They phoned her pals, none of them had seen her. And when the hours crept by with no sign of Lorraine, the worry came them like a cold wave crashing over them. Malcolm felt something was amiss. His belly twisted with a father's instinct, that nagging sense he couldn't escape. Lorraine wasn't the sort to disappear without a word, without letting someone know where she was. And when the sun set on that first day without her, Malcolm did the only thing he could. He called in a missing persons report. The sheriff's office leaped into action, or so it appeared. Leading the hunt was none other than Graham Walker, the guy who had every incentive to make sure Lorraine was never discovered. Graham wore the mask of professionalism brilliantly, his voice steady, his manner serene, as he told the community that he would do all in his power to bring Lorraine home. But every step Graham took was deliberate. Every lead pursued, every search arranged, was done with one objective in mind: to keep the truth buried along with Lorraine. The search started immediately, with deputies combing the town, interviewing everyone who might have seen her. Graham ensured that every attempt appeared authentic, crews searching parks, abandoned houses, and back roads. He was there every step of the way, yelling commands, consoling volunteers, and appearing to go above and above. To everyone else, he seemed like a man anxious to find the missing girl. But in actuality, Graham was always 2 steps ahead, leading the inquiry away from the one place they'd never investigate: the secluded area where Lorraine's body lay concealed beneath the icy dirt. Malcolm, anxious for answers, leaned heavily on Graham, his old friend and mentor. Graham played the part well, delivering words of comfort and support, his arms stretched across Malcolm's shoulders as they sorted through the choices. "We'll find her, Malcolm," he stated more many times, his voice firm and encouraging. "I promise you, we'll bring her home." Each time Malcolm's optimism faded, Graham was there to grab him. He kept close to the family, visiting their house regularly, sitting at their kitchen table, and holding Vivian's hand while she grieved. He became their lifeline in the pandemonium, the one person they felt they could rely on while everything else was coming apart. And that was precisely how Graham wanted it. But Graham's grasp on the probe was strong. He meticulously controlled the story, directing deputies and volunteers toward false leads. He indicated that Lorraine could have left town on her own, possibly overburdened by the responsibilities of school and life. He suggested the possibility that she may be staying with a friend who hadn't come forward yet, or even that she might have been picked up by someone she knew. His theories created seeds of doubt, leading the quest onto useless trails that went nowhere. Graham understood how to manipulate the emotions of people around him, playing the character of the concerned sheriff while gently driving the inquiry further from the truth. Every time the search teams drew close to a spot he thought they could find, Graham conveniently produced a new lead: a sighting that needed to be looked out on the other side of town, a tip that demanded quick attention elsewhere. He kept everyone moving, always one step behind where they needed to be, ensuring that no one ever ventured close to the cemetery where Lorraine's body remained. Meanwhile, Lorraine's parents clung to every word Graham uttered, believing that he was doing all in his power to find their daughter. Malcolm, especially, relied on Graham more than anybody else. As a parent and an officer, Malcolm felt powerless in the face of his daughter's absence. But with Graham leading the effort, he felt a flicker of optimism, a confidence that if anybody could bring Lorraine back, it was the guy he had trusted for so many years. Graham understood just how to manage that trust, utilizing it to keep Malcolm near while keeping the reality at distance. He made careful to engage Malcolm in every phase of the inquiry, giving him just enough responsibility to feel involved, but never enough to unearth the truth. And when Malcolm's frustration boiled over, Graham was there to absorb it and help him release his wrath without raising suspicion. "I should have been there," Malcolm repeated more than once, remorse and anguish heavy in his voice. "I should have protected her." Graham would shake his head, his look serious. "This isn't your fault, Malcolm. We'll find her. I promise you, we'll find her." It was the ideal manipulation, a precise combination of comfort and control, of empathy and dishonesty. Graham offered the Carters just enough optimism to keep them going, just enough confidence to prevent them from looking too carefully at the holes in the inquiry. Days stretched into weeks, and yet there was no trace of Lorraine. The neighborhood was restless, rumors flying like wildfire. Theories muttered in low tones. Some felt she had fled away, others feared something worse. But despite it all, Graham remained a solid presence, the one everyone went to for answers. Behind the scenes, however, the weight of his activities was beginning to take its toll. Each day the probe went on was a reminder of the dreadful reality he was hiding. And though he wore the mask of the worried sheriff effectively, there were moments when the cracks began to appear, moments when the guilt gnawed at the corners of his thoughts, threatening to unravel the neatly crafted fiction he had established. But Graham couldn't afford to falter. The minute he faltered, the moment he let his guard down, everything would come tumbling down around him. So he kept going, continued guiding the search, kept feeding Malcolm and Vivian just enough optimism to prevent them from giving up. He realized that time was on his side. The longer the hunt went on without results, the more people would come to assume that Lorraine was gone for good. And if the inquiry carried on long enough, ultimately, it would fade into the background. Another unresolved case, another tragedy with no answers. That was the dream Graham held to, that the hunt would fade out, that the community would move on, and that his secret would remain buried where no one would ever find it. But secrets have a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply they're buried. And as the days went, the strain on Graham got harder. The holes in his meticulously managed environment creeped larger with each passing moment. The inquiry he had fought so hard to manage was sliding further from his hands, and the harder he tried to keep it confined, the more delicate it became. But for now, Graham stayed in control barely. He kept the inquiry alive just enough to preserve appearances, kept Malcolm near enough to discourage him from going elsewhere, and kept the truth buried behind layers of falsehoods and false leads. But Graham understood, deep inside, that this frail deception couldn't survive forever. The truth was out there, ready to be revealed. And when it eventually came to light, it would tear through everything in its path. Time has a way of dulling memories and smoothing the rough edges of sadness, but not for everyone. 5 months after Lorraine's disappearance, the community had begun to settle back into its normal, as people do after a tragedy. Life continued on, yet her absence lingered at quiet times, and her name stayed on the lips of those who still waited for answers. But as the days stretched into months, even optimism began to evaporate. It was becoming another cold case, one of those unresolved tragedies that left behind more questions than answers. The search parties had slowed. The posters pasted on shops had started to peel, and the once constant hum of curiosity had quieted to whispers. It seemed, at least to some, that Lorraine had just vanished without a trace. And Graham Walker assumed that, given time, the truth would remain buried much like Lorraine. But then, as it often does in cases like these, the truth began to surface unexpectedly, and from the most unlikely source. The truth doesn't remain buried forever, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. It wasn't hackers or investigators that revealed the first flaws in Graham Walker's web of falsehoods. It was 2 average hikers, out for what should have been a tranquil day on the trails. They had no notion that what was ahead would unveil a riddle that has tormented the community for months. The hikers, a couple in their late 20s, had walked deep into a woodland area rarely frequented by anybody other than animal aficionados. The route was rugged and meandering, going through dark forests where quiet reigned, broken only by the odd rustle of leaves. It was the type of spot where no one would expect to find anything but nature, much less a hidden secret. As the sun sank lower in the sky, producing lengthy shadows down the pathway, they observed something strange, an abnormal disturbance in the earth, just off the path. A piece of ground, uneven and somewhat depressed, stood out from the rest of the woodland floor. The hikers exchanged apprehensive glances. It may have been nothing, a buried animal, maybe, but something about it seemed odd. Their curiosity got the better of them. With tentative steps, they approached the damaged ground. As one of them crouched down to study it more closely, they found something chilling. What looked like a corner of cloth, just visible behind the mud and fallen leaves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a shudder down their spines. They knew better than to disrupt the place any further. Instead, they noted the spot with their GPS and swiftly made their way back to the next ranger station, their hearts hammering with a mixture of panic and disbelief. The rangers, alerted by the hikers' discovery, informed local authorities. And within hours, a whole investigation team was on scene. What they found beneath the disturbed dirt verified the hikers' worst fears. Lorraine Carter's body, wrapped carefully in a tarp, lay in a shallow burial. Her remains revealed a quiet, sad narrative of betrayal and cruelty. But the finding didn't only identify the location of her remains. It sparked more questions than it solved. How had Lorraine ended up here? And more importantly, who had put her there? As the forensic team worked meticulously at the scene, law enforcement personnel examined the surrounding area for evidence. And it was there, among the mud and greenery, that they uncovered the first piece of incontrovertible evidence, a little vial, half buried in the soil, containing the faint imprint of a fingerprint. It was a hint apparently trivial at first look, but one that would eventually prove essential to the inquiry. With Lorraine's body retrieved, the case that had gotten cold unexpectedly revived. The detectives took up the case, determined to put together the reality behind her abduction. They went through GPS data from Lorraine's phone, following her travels from the night she disappeared. And what they uncovered began to shatter the neatly prepared falsehoods Graham had woven. The data indicated a disturbing pattern. Lorraine's phone had pinged from various locations distant from where Graham said she had last been seen. Among them was a lonely gas station just outside of town, a seemingly ordinary stop that would become a vital piece of evidence in the case. When the police received surveillance footage from the petrol station, the entire scale of Graham's lie came into perspective. The blurry footage, captured on the same night Lorraine vanished, showed Graham's pickup arriving into the parking lot. His demeanor was taut, his eyes sweeping the surroundings as if screening for any unwelcome attention. And on the passenger seat, slumped and lifeless, was Lorraine. Her head leaned on the glass, her body limp as Graham stepped out of the truck and gazed around the lot. He stepped inside momentarily, re-emerged seconds later, and throwing another glance toward Lorraine's motionless figure before sliding back into the driver's seat. With a brief look over his shoulder, Graham drove out into the darkness, the truck disappearing from the frame and, until now, from the town's collective memory. The footage was incriminating not merely because it put Graham with Lorraine on the night she vanished, but because of the situation she was in, unconscious, vulnerable, and in the presence of the exact man pledged to guard her. The film generated obvious questions. Why had Graham never disclosed being with Lorraine that night? Why had he omitted to record their encounter in his official statements? And what had truly transpired when they left the petrol station? With Lorraine's travels traced to the burial location and security evidence connecting Graham to her dying hours, the investigators realized they were closing in on the truth. But they needed more than suspicion. They wanted strong evidence. And the key to uncovering that proof rested in the digital breadcrumbs Lorraine's phone had left behind. The GPS data from Graham's truck extracted from onboard tracking equipment gave the final piece of the jigsaw. The records corroborated what the camera film had suggested. Graham's truck had gone from the petrol station to the secluded region where Lorraine's body was recovered, matching the exact position noted by the hikers. Every turn, every pause, was accounted for, portraying a terrifying picture of premeditation and cover-up. It was a trail Graham hadn't expected anybody to follow. But no matter how well he had attempted to disguise his acts, the truth had found a way to the surface, first through the walkers on the route, then through the tireless labor of investigators seeking to discover the secrets concealed under the surface. The finding of Lorraine's body wasn't only the conclusion of a search, it was the beginning of justice. And the hikers, oblivious of the maelstrom their tranquil walk in the woods would unleash, had unintentionally found the secret Graham Walker had buried both literally and metaphorically. As the inquiry gained speed, the truth of Graham's betrayal spread around the community like wildfire. His carefully manufactured mask of authority broke before the weight of the facts. And with each new finding, the community came to comprehend the extent of his dishonesty and the price Lorraine had paid for his misuse of power. The hikers' discovery on that secluded route would become the turning point in a case that had gone cold for far too long. And as the community waited for the storm that was about to follow, one thing was certain: no secret, no matter how deeply buried, could stay concealed forever. The click of the handcuffs boomed across the quiet office as they latched around his wrists, cold metal searing into his flesh. Graham muttered nothing. The fight faded from him as the weight of his deeds sank like a stone in his chest. There was no more fleeing, no more lying. The truth had come up with him, and there was nowhere left to escape. The agents walked him out of the office, past the deputies who had formerly admired him, past the desks where he had commanded power. Now, they looked at him not as their sheriff, but as the guy who had compromised all the badge stood for. Whispers followed him down the corridor, the weight of their judgment heavy on his shoulders. As the agents walked Graham to the waiting automobile, the sun rose high in the sky, pouring harsh light on the day of reckoning. The truth, previously hidden behind lies and deception, has now come to the surface. And with it, Graham Walker's life as he knew it was finished. The man who had spent his life serving justice was now trapped by the same system he had previously controlled, a prisoner of his own faults. And when the vehicle doors slammed shut, the message was clear: no one, not even the sheriff, is above the law. Grief by itself is painful, but realizing the full scope of a catastrophe delivers an anguish few can describe. When the cops retrieved Lorraine Carter's body, the nightmare grew with every discovery that followed. It wasn't simply the violation of trust, the brutal murder, or the loss of a young life. The autopsy revealed a last, heartbreaking revelation that wrecked what little left of her family's existence. The forensic experts established that Lorraine had been in the early stages of pregnancy. The kid she had carried, Graham Walker's child, had been developing inside her when her life was ruthlessly seized. That finding transformed the anguish of her parents, Malcolm and Vivian Carter, into something intolerable. They weren't simply mourning their daughter. They were mourning the grandson they would never meet. It was a loss coated with treachery, violation, and unmet dreams. Malcolm could scarcely digest the news. His hands trembled as the police informed him of the pregnancy. It was more than he could take, the idea that his own daughter had borne a child, only to be silenced by a man he trusted, a guy who had sat at his kitchen table and provided him comfort as they looked for her. The weight of that treachery pushed down on Malcolm's chest, strangling him with a shame he couldn't shake. How had he overlooked the signs? How could he have stood with Graham, seeking for his daughter, while the guy responsible led them astray? And the pregnancy, he hadn't even realized she was in a relationship, never alone, involved with a man like Graham. It was too much. The betrayal came at him in layers, stripping back all he thought he knew, leaving him naked and vulnerable. Vivian Carter, already buried beneath the weight of her grief, plunged into total despair when the autopsy results were released. The kid would have been her first grandchild, a new beginning, a reason to hope. And now, both Lorraine and the unborn child were gone, buried together under a veil of lies and treachery. There were no words that could soothe the agony of such a loss. Every dream Vivian had for her daughter's future was gone, taken away in the cruelest of ways. News of Lorraine's pregnancy circulated swiftly, turning an already awful murder into something much more unimaginable. Graham Walker wasn't simply a killer. He was a predator who had misused his position of power, corrupted a young child, and murdered 2 lives to conceal his tracks. The guy who had previously been the community's guardian now stood as a symbol of everything they detested. Protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office and the courtroom, their cries ringing through the streets. Signs demanding justice for Lorraine and baby Carter waved in the air as the clamor for Graham's conviction grew louder by the day. The town, once proud of their sheriff, now saw him as a monster in uniform. Every pleasant gesture, every honor he had gotten, felt like a parody of the horror he had buried under his badge. In the Walker home, the disclosures were equally heartbreaking. Brenda Walker sat in startled silence as the news unfolded, her life shattering beneath the weight of her husband's falsehoods. She had been stunned by the affair, crushed by the murder, but the pregnancy that was the ultimate blow, the one fact she couldn't fathom. She went back to every moment she had shared with Graham, every day he had spent with their girls, knowing now that he had held this horrible secret the entire time. It wasn't only the treachery, it was the knowledge that her husband had fathered a kid with Lorraine, a girl they had seen grow up, a friend to their own daughter. The raw harshness of it left her speechless. Nina Walker, Graham's youngest daughter and Lorraine's best friend, was crushed by the news. She had spent weeks grieving Lorraine, trying to comprehend how her father could be complicit in such a crime. But knowing about the pregnancy was too much to take. Lorraine had been carrying her half-sibling, and now, both were gone, snatched by the man she previously called Dad. It was a betrayal so profound that Nina didn't know how to handle it. Nina retreated inside herself, shutting off the world. She refused to speak to her father, wouldn't even recognize his presence. The notion of him repulsed her. Every memory they had shared, the ones she previously valued, were now tainted by the knowledge of what he had done. She felt as though her entire existence had been based on falsehoods, and the weight of that understanding shattered her. Hudson, Graham's oldest daughter, replied with rage. She had always been closer to her father, had looked up to him as a role model, only to learn that he had performed horrific actions against someone she had grown up with. The pregnancy was the final straw. Hudson packed her things and left the house, breaking all links with her father, unable to forgive him for the lives he had wrecked. The Walker home, once full with laughter and regularity, became a silent battle zone. Brenda tried to pull her girls together, but there was no healing the devastation Graham had done. Their family was devastated beyond repair, split by the weight of his treachery. And in the quiet times, when the world was motionless, Brenda sat alone, coping with the truth that the man she had loved for decades was capable of such horrific crimes. The community's fury grew stronger with every passing day. Lorraine had been one of their own, brilliant, ambitious, and full of potential. And now, both her and her unborn child were gone, victims of a man they had once trusted. The call for justice was persistent. They wanted to see Graham punished not just for Lorraine's death, but for the life of the child she carried. They wanted to ensure that he could never injure anyone again. Malcolm and Vivian took some relief in the community's support, but it was a chilly comfort. The death of their daughter and granddaughter caused a gap that could never be replaced. They attended every court session, sitting in the front row, desperate to see Graham face the full weight of justice. But even a conviction wouldn't bring Lorraine back. Even seeing Graham in handcuffs wouldn't mend the scars left behind. The tragedy that began with Graham's deception had turned into something far greater, a narrative of betrayal, sorrow, and shattered trust. The town would never forget what had transpired, and neither would the families involved. The name Graham Walker would forever be connected with misery, with loss, with the lives he had ruined to preserve his own secrets. And as the trial drew, the community braced itself for the last chapter, a reckoning long overdue for Lorraine, for her kid, and for everyone whose lives had been wrecked by the man they had called sheriff. The trial of Graham Walker grabbed the town and the nation, dragging everyone into the tragic narrative of treachery, deception, and murder. Reporters filled the courthouse, cameras poised outside like vultures, eager to catch every second of the sheriff's collapse. It was not simply a trial. It was a reckoning, one that demanded every painful truth be laid bare for the public to see. From the onset, the prosecution spent no time setting out their case, presenting a story of manipulation that showed Graham's real character, a guy who had misused his status and preyed on someone who trusted him. Every step he did was deliberate, they maintained, from the commencement of the affair to the cold-blooded murder that followed. Graham Walker, they claimed, was not the man the community had thought he was. He was a man who used his badge as a shield to hide his darkest impulses. Piece by piece, the prosecution recreated the events leading up to Lorraine's death, using security footage, phone records, and forensic evidence to present a devastating picture. They uncovered Graham's efforts to exploit Lorraine, encouraging her to meet with him under the premise of mentorship. They detailed how he brought her to the distant spot, drugged her, and finally murdered her to protect his reputation and profession. The courtroom was hushed as the prosecutors outlined Graham's acts. Every phrase seemed like a hammer smashing the very roots of faith. Each piece of evidence served as a reminder of the guy Graham had claimed to be and the monster he had become under the surface. Then came the emotional testimonials, and with them, the core of the trial was stripped naked. Lorraine's parents, Malcolm and Vivian Carter, were the first to take the stand. There was no mistaking the anguish etched onto their cheeks, nor the weight of the pain they bore as they spoke about the daughter they had lost. Malcolm's voice trembled as he recalled the first day Graham had joined their hunt for Lorraine, standing by him as a valued friend. "He looked me in the eye," Malcolm recounted, attempting to hold back tears. "He told me we'd find her. And the whole time he knew exactly where she was." His voice shook, and he buried his face in his hands, the weight of the treachery too great to take. Vivian's testimony was similarly terrible. She told of the ideas Lorraine had for her future, the plans she had revealed late at night over cups of tea. She wanted to make a difference, Vivian said, her voice shaking. She wanted to work for the detectives, to protect people. And instead, the man we trusted, our friend, stole her future and buried it in the ground. Her words hung in the air, saturated with the sadness of a mother who would never watch her daughter grow into the woman she was intended to become. As the trial progressed, the courtroom was filled with a palpable tension. Every witness, every object revealed, brought the awful reality into closer perspective. But the most devastating evidence came from Graham's own relatives. Brenda Walker, his wife, entered the stand with a sad heart, her voice calm but filled with incredulity. "I don't know who my husband is anymore," she acknowledged. "The man I married, the father of my children, he wasn't capable of this. Or at least, I thought he wasn't." She spoke about the months of falsehoods, the late hours when Graham returned home with explanations that now seemed like insults. "I believed him," she remarked gently. "I believed every word. And now, I have to live with the fact that I was married to a man I never really knew." Her words hit with the weight of 1,000 betrayals, a woman forced to confront the deepest truth about the man she had lived her life with. Nina Walker, Graham's youngest daughter, provided possibly the most devastating evidence of the trial. As she sat in the witness chair, tears flowing down her cheeks, she testified of the friendship she had experienced with Lorraine and the grief she felt when the truth came to light. "She was my best friend," Nina replied, her voice shaking. "She was like a sister to me. And my father took her away from me." The gathering fell into stillness as Nina's pain flowed forth, unfiltered and genuine. The prosecution pressed further, portraying a portrait of a man who had not only betrayed his badge, but devastated 2 families in the process. They detailed the lengths Graham went to in order to keep control, his manipulation of Lorraine, the falsehoods he told his family, the web of deceit he created around everyone who trusted him. Finally, it was Graham's time to face interrogation. The room was silent as he took the stand, the weight of his acts crushing down on him from all sides. He had denied the affair at first, rejected everything, clinging to the notion that he could somehow escape the repercussions. But as the evidence mounted up, it became evident that there was no escape. Under the continuous questioning of the prosecution, Graham's defenses began to shatter. His veneer of cool authority slid away, revealing the man beneath, a man overwhelmed by dread, remorse, and shame. At first, his replies were short, clipped, as he sought to keep control. But the prosecutor's questioning cut deeper, driving him to confront the truth of what he had done. "Did you have an affair with Lorraine?" the prosecutor said, his voice calm and hard. Graham hesitated, the weight of the truth smothering him. He opened his lips to refute it again, but the words wouldn't come. His shoulders dropped beneath the heavy strain, and for the first time, he confessed the truth. "Yes," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I did." The confession sent a wave through the courtroom. Graham's family sat transfixed in shock, while Lorraine's parents embraced one another, their sadness too intense to handle. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. He pressed deeper, pushing Graham to confront the full gravity of his conduct. "And did you kill her?" the prosecutor questioned, moving in closer. "Did you take her life to protect your secret?" Graham's composure broke. His hands trembled as he buried his face in them, the weight of his shame too tremendous to bear. "Yes," he gasped out. "I killed her. I didn't know what else to do." His tears filled the courtroom, the sound of a man shattered by his own faults. The room sat in startled stillness, the confession hanging in the air like a thick fog. There were no more falsehoods to tell, no more masks to wear. Graham Walker, previously the renowned sheriff, has admitted to the unimaginable. The trial was far from done, but the truth had finally come to light. Graham's confession represented the beginning of the end, an end that would bring justice for Lorraine and her unborn child, and some sort of closure to the relatives whose lives had been devastated. And as the gavel struck, indicating the conclusion of the day's proceedings, one thing was certain: Graham Walker's destiny was determined, and there would be no escape the repercussions of his conduct. The courtroom was hushed, weighted with the weight of justice about to be given. Graham Walker stood handcuffed before the court, his shoulders sagged beneath the crushing weight of what he had done. But no shackles, no bars, could ever properly symbolize the tragedy of the lives lost at his hands, the life of Lorraine Carter, the young lady he deceived, and the unborn child she carried. This was not merely the sentence of a man. It was the reckoning for 2 lives stolen too soon. The judge cleared his throat, his countenance grave as he addressed the courtroom. His remarks bore the weight of the community's sadness, the agony of 2 bereaved families, and the guilt of treachery from a man once entrusted with authority and duty. There would be no simple way to administer this punishment, for no words could properly describe the devastation perpetrated by Graham Walker. "Mr. Walker," the judge began, his voice calm but firm, "you have not only committed a grievous crime, but you have also left behind irreparable damage to the lives of those you were sworn to protect. You betrayed a young woman who trusted you, exploited her vulnerability under the guise of mentorship, and in doing so, took advantage of your authority in the most despicable way imaginable. The courtroom remained motionless as the judge's stare sharpened. Lorraine Carter was not only a victim of your manipulation. She was a young woman with dreams, ambitions, and a future ahead of her, a future that included the unborn child she carried. A child you helped create, and a child you silenced when you decided to take Lorraine's life. Gasps rippled across the gallery, the weight of the discovery sinking in once again. Lorraine had carried inside her not just the hopes of her parents, but the beginnings of a new life, a life that would never see the light of day, all because of Graham's urgent desire to conceal his tracks. The judge stopped, allowing the severity of those words to settle in before continuing. The child growing inside Lorraine was your child, Mr. Walker. You knew the consequences of that revelation would ruin your career, your reputation, and your family. And in a moment of selfishness and cowardice, you chose to end 2 lives to protect yourself. That choice reflects the depths of your betrayal, not just to Lorraine, but to your own unborn child. Tears ran down the faces of Malcolm and Vivian Carter as the judge acknowledged their unspeakable loss. They were not only mourning their daughter, but also the grandson they would never meet. The double defeat weighed heavily on them, and the remarks from the court further emphasized the severity of Graham's treachery. Brenda Walker held her hands tightly in her lap, as if the sheer force of her hold might keep her from fracturing altogether. Graham's children, Nina and Hudson, sat immobile, shocked by the disclosures that had broken their family apart. Lorraine's unborn kid would have been their half-sibling, a revelation too difficult for them to completely accept. The judge's voice remained calm, albeit his look was one of severe sadness. The badge you wore, Mr. Walker, was meant to serve as a symbol of integrity, responsibility, and protection. But you wielded it as a shield to hide your darkest intentions. You manipulated, you betrayed, and you destroyed. This court cannot undo the harm you've caused, nor can it restore the lives you took. But it can ensure that you never again harm another soul. The room held its breath as the judge gave the sentence. This court finds you guilty of first-degree murder, abuse of authority, and gross misconduct. In light of the severity of these crimes, and the fact that your actions resulted in the deaths of both Lorraine Carter and your unborn child, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck with a piercing crack, the sound resonating through the courtroom like a definitive verdict. There would be no mercy, no chance for repentance. Graham Walker's destiny was determined, and he would spend the balance of his days in a jail cell, plagued by the lives he had taken. The gallery sat in quiet as the gravity of the punishment struck in. Malcolm and Vivian clung to one another, their sadness too intense for words. The child Lorraine had carried, an innocent life caught in the crossfire of deception and treachery, would never be known, never have a name. And the knowledge of that loss, like a wound that would never heal, would linger with them for the rest of their lives. On the other side of the courtroom, Brenda bent her head, unable to reconcile the man she had married with the monster now carried away in shackles. Her kids, Nina and Hudson, were motionless in their seats, their emotions churning in a tempest of uncertainty and anguish. The trial had disclosed too much information they never wanted to know, burdens they never dreamed they would shoulder. As Graham was led out the courthouse, the community watched in quiet. They had placed their faith in him, and he had destroyed it in the worst way conceivable. The penalty was justice, but it could never really heal the pain left behind. Lorraine and her kid were gone, and no amount of justice could bring them back. The judge's final comments remained in the air as the courtroom emptied. "Let this serve as a reminder," he had added, "that power is not a privilege, it is a responsibility. And when that responsibility is betrayed, there are consequences. No one is above the law, and no betrayal will go unanswered." The trial of Graham Walker would be regarded not simply as the narrative of one man's fall from grace, but as a cautionary tale about the risks of unbridled power and the significance of responsibility. It was a reminder that authority means nothing without integrity, and that every betrayal, no matter how deeply hidden, would ultimately come to light. And so, with Graham's conviction to life without parole, the community was left to pick up the pieces. Justice had been served, but the loss remained a haunting reminder of the lives lost too soon and the trust that could never be rebuilt. Even after the trial concluded and Graham Walker was locked up, the anguish he created lingered like a cloud over the neighborhood. There were no easy answers, no quick remedies. Lorraine's death was not only a tragedy, it was a reckoning that compelled everyone to confront the truth of treachery buried beneath power and trust. And in the midst of such catastrophe, mending was sluggish and unequal. But it has to begin somewhere. For Malcolm and Vivian Carter, the death of their daughter was a pain that would never entirely heal. There were days when the loss felt intolerable, when the stillness left behind by Lorraine's absence was too loud to ignore. But they refused to let her memory be defined exclusively by tragedy. Determined to build something meaningful from their grief, they formed the Lorraine Carter Foundation, an organization committed to aiding young women who had endured abuse at the hands of people in power. The nonprofit became a beacon of hope, providing legal help, therapy, and mentorship for survivors of abuse. What started as a local project swiftly evolved, drawing national notice. The Carter family traveled the country, speaking at schools and community centers, hoping to protect other families from facing the same trauma they had faced. For Malcolm and Vivian, the foundation was a way to commemorate their daughter's memory and safeguard others from the risks she faced. But healing took various forms, and not all of it was apparent to the public. Brenda Walker and her children, Nina and Hudson, discreetly packed their lives into boxes and left town, seeking to escape the controversy that had devoured their family. The weight of Graham's treachery was too tremendous to bear in the community they previously called home. Every street, every face, was a reminder of what had been lost. Brenda sought a new town, far away from the headlines, a place where she and her girls could start anew. For Nina and Hudson, going away gave a chance at healing, but it also meant addressing the reality of who their father was. It would be years before they could properly absorb what had occurred, before they could separate their memories of the man they loved from the monster he became. Their path toward recovery would be long and complex, but it was a step they were eager to take together. Back in town, the community worked to regain trust. Once freely offered, trust became difficult to come by. The sheriff's office underwent a comprehensive revamp, with new leadership seeking to regain the public's confidence. Policies were updated, protections put in place, and required training on ethics and responsibility became normal practice. The municipality realized it would take more than simply new regulations to re-establish confidence, but they were eager to try. Local schools and community groups joined with the Carter Foundation to produce programs targeted at teaching young people about the risks of deception and misuse of power. It became a part of the town's identity, a lesson learnt the hard way, but one they were resolved not to forget. Lorraine's experience was shared publicly, not as a scar, but as a reminder of the need of speaking up, of keeping people in power responsible. There were still times of wrath, of irritation. The wound Graham left behind would take years to heal, and some would never completely recover. But slowly, piece by bit, the community discovered ways to go on. They realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering and learning, about becoming stronger and wiser through the agony. Even as the community began to recover, a question persisted, one that worried every family, every cop, every individual who had followed the case. How can we protect ourselves from those sworn to protect us? Graham Walker had worn a badge, had sworn an oath to serve and protect, and yet he had used that badge to control, to betray, and to destroy. His narrative was not only one of personal failure, it was a warning, a reminder that power in the wrong hands is a deadly thing. The challenge today was not only about justice for Lorraine, it was about stopping the next betrayal before it could happen. But this narrative is not the only one of its sort. There are other abuses of power, other betrayals buried under authority, waiting to be discovered. Stories of manipulation, exploitation, and domination that deserve to be told. Stories that remind us why accountability matters, and why we must never stop challenging those who wield power. And so, we leave you with this question. What would you do if the person supposed to protect you became the one you dreaded most? How can we defend against those who hide behind trust and authority? There are more stories to tell, more realities waiting to be disclosed. Join us for the next installment, as we unearth another horrific example of abuse of power, one that will left you doubting everything you thought you knew. Please subscribe and remain with us as we continue to reveal the tales that demand justice and responsibility. Because the only way to avoid treachery is to shed a light on the dark places where it lurks. This isn't the end, it's merely the beginning.